The laughter echoed through the penthouse like champagne bubbles bursting against glass. Ethan stood near the balcony, his smile steady, the skyline flickering behind him. Isabella's success shimmered brighter than the city lights, her colleagues circling, their words painted with admiration and envy. When she raised her glass, her voice carried that careless lilt, light as a joke, heavy as a blade. And to Ethan, she laughed, who still believes real work requires dirt under your nails. The room erupted in easy laughter. Ethan's smile didn't falter. He watched her eyes, saw no malice, only ignorance, the kind that cuts deepest when wrapped in charm. The applause faded, but inside him, something shifted quietly, like the earth before a quake. The night went on, music swelling, but his heart had already left the room, ghosting through the open door towards silence. The next morning, sunlight bled through half-drawn curtains, soft and indifferent. The apartment smelled of spilled champagne and wilted roses. Isabella stirred alone in bed, smile lingering from dreams she didn't remember. The laughter of the night replayed faintly in her head until silence pressed in, an absence too sharp to ignore. His watch, his jacket, the space where his shoes had been, all gone. On the kitchen counter, beside the empty wine glass, lay the engagement ring. No note, no message, just quiet. She whispered his name once, as if sound could undo distance, but the only answer was the hum of the city below. For the first time, victory felt like loss. Ethan's truck rolled down the highway before dawn, headlights cutting through fog like quiet resolve. He didn't look back at the skyline fading behind him. The hum of the engine drowned out every word he'd never said. In the glove compartment sat the folded wedding invitation, one he hadn't the heart to throw away yet. He breathed deeply, the air thick with asphalt and change. Each mile wasn't an escape, but a return to something honest, something unadorned. The kind of silence that doesn't hurt, just clarifies. Back in the city, Isabella sat at her vanity, phone buzzing with unread messages. Her reflection looked perfect, but her eyes were searching for him in every gleam of glass. Pride told her he'd overreacted. Fear whispered she'd gone too far. She replayed her toast, every word sharper now, every laugh a dagger she hadn't meant to throw. The apartment, once alive with ambition, felt hollow. She reached for her phone again, but didn't call. Not yet. Nora found Ethan that evening at the construction yard, sitting on a steel beam as the sun dipped low. He said nothing when she handed him coffee. He didn't need to. His silence spoke of things too heavy for words. Betrayal, pride, and a strange peace that comes when a decision makes itself. She sat beside him, watching sparks fly from welders in the distance, their rhythm steady and real. Life didn't stop for heartbreak. It just kept building, one bolt at a time. The city pulsed without pause, its rhythm too fast for reflection. Isabella moved through her office that week like a ghost trapped in her own success. Every congratulation about her promotion felt like sandpaper. She smiled, nodded, pretended. But when her phone screen lit up, no new messages, she felt the same chill every time. Ethan had vanished cleanly, leaving no digital shadow, no trace in routine or rumor. She told herself he'd call when he cooled down, but deep inside, she knew this wasn't anger. This was finality. The kind that moves quietly, without warning, like a door shutting in another room. Still, she performed, her laughter hollow, her reflection more composed than her heart. People said she looked radiant. She only felt erased. Ethan spent his mornings at the construction site, blending into the rhythm of steel and dust. The clang of metal felt truer than any words spoken that night. Each strike of the hammer dulled the echo of laughter that haunted him. He didn't hate her. Not really. What lingered was disappointment, a wound made not from cruelty, but carelessness. He remembered her smile when they first met, how proud she'd been of his hands, the same hands she'd made the punchline of her promotion. The irony tasted like rust. When the day ended, he stayed behind, watching the sunset through the unfinished beams. Sometimes healing isn't moving on. It's just staying still long enough to remember who you were before love made you forget. Days turned into weeks. Isabella's apartment grew colder, her reflection sharper. Friends stopped asking about the wedding. Gossip filled the silence where truth should been. She scrolled through old photos, laughter, mountain hikes, shared meals in dim diners, all glowing with sincerity she'd taken for granted. Her pride told her to move on, to stay busy, but grief found its way through productivity. Late at night, she drafted messages she never sent. Each started the same way. I didn't mean it. Each ended with please come home. But the cursor always blinked longer than her resolve. When she finally closed her laptop, the city outside looked nothing like the one they'd built together. Nora saw it first. The way Ethan worked harder but spoke less. He wasn't broken, just emptied. During lunch breaks, he'd sit apart, sketching beams and frames on scrap paper, building order out of chaos. She didn't ask about Isabella. He didn't offer. Silence had become his language, one she respected. But one evening, as rain fell heavy against the scaffolding, she finally said it. "You didn't deserve that." He looked up, eyes distant but alive. "Maybe not," he said quietly. "But maybe I needed it." The sound of rain filled what words couldn't. Sometimes truth arrives soaked, but it still lands. At a company gala a month later, Isabella smiled on cue. Flashbulbs, handshakes, and champagne once again. But this time, she felt every ounce of the emptiness behind it. When Marcus approached, his charm as smooth as polished marble, she barely noticed. His compliment about her dress slid past her like static. All she could think of was how Ethan would have laughed at the pretense, how he'd have found beauty in the simplicity she'd traded away. As the crowd cheered another success story, Isabella turned toward the exit. For the first time, she didn't care who saw her leave. Rumors moved faster than remorse. Within weeks, the story of Isabella's cruel toast had circulated through her company's corridors, retold with embellishments sharp enough to draw blood. She could feel it in every passing glance, every polite smile that faltered a second too long. The promotion that once crowned her ambition now weighed like a crown of thorns. She buried herself in meetings, in memos, in the endless scroll of productivity that dulled her thoughts. But in quiet moments, the elevator ride down, the taxi window fogged with rain. She saw Ethan's face again, not angry, just gone. That absence echoed louder than any accusation could. She'd built a life on image, and now, image was all she had left. Ethan's world had narrowed to the hum of machinery and the rhythm of routine. There was peace in predictability, the kind forged from exhaustion rather than contentment. Each morning began before sunrise, coffee bitter, sky still bruised with dawn. He spoke little, laughed less, but his work thrived. The men respected his steadiness, the way he carried pain like a hidden blueprint, structured, unspoken. When Nora asked once if he missed her, he only said, "Not her. Just what I thought we were." The wind swallowed the rest. Healing wasn't a grand moment. It was the slow erosion of what no longer fit. Marcus found her one evening on the company balcony, a half-empty glass in hand and mascara smudged beneath her eyes. He tried to comfort her with easy words, that people forget, that she'd recover her shine, but she wasn't listening. For once, Isabella didn't crave attention. She feared it. The world she'd fought to belong to now mirrored her own cruelty back at her. She saw herself as Ethan must have. Brilliant, yes, but hollow, where humility should have lived. Marcus's voice faded into the hum of city noise. "You ever lose something you didn't value until it was gone?" she asked. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Nora watched Ethan from a distance, the way one watches a storm settle. He had changed. Not softer, not harder, just quieter. The crew joked around him, unaware of the battles had already fought and lost. Sometimes she caught him staring into the skeletal frame of an unfinished building, eyes tracing invisible lines. "You're still designing something in your head," she said once. He shrugged. "I guess I'm just figuring out how to rebuild from the ground up." She smiled, though her heart ached. Some men drown in heartbreak. Others learn to build bridges from it. That night, Isabella sat by her window, phone in hand, screen glowing with the contact she never deleted. Her reflection shimmered in the glass, poised, beautiful, empty. She typed his name, hesitated, then deleted it again. There were no words left that could unmake that moment, no apology that could cleanse a wound born from pride. The city moved on beneath her, alive and indifferent. She finally whispered, "I'm sorry." To no one, to everyone, to the silence that had replaced him. In the quiet, she realized it wasn't just Ethan she'd lost. It was the part of herself that knew how to love without measure. Autumn arrived like a reckoning. Crisp air, fallen leaves, and the silence between them. Isabella tracked Ethan to a small town 2 hours from the city, where word said he'd taken a foreman's job. She drove there alone. The highway stretching endless and gray, her thoughts a loop of regret and unfinished sentences. When she reached the site, she stayed in the car for a long time, watching him from a distance. He looked different, grounded, deliberate, untouchable. The man she'd once tried to polish now glowed from within, unbothered by polish at all. Fear replaced arrogance as she realized how far behind she'd fallen in understanding him. She stepped out, gravel crunching under her heels, heart beating a rhythm she didn't deserve to feel again. When Ethan finally noticed her, time seemed to fold inward. The clang of steel, the murmur of workers, all faded until only her breath filled the space between them. She started to speak, rehearsed words dissolving before they found meaning. "I didn't mean to," she began, but he raised a hand, calm and firm. "I know," he said quietly. His voice carried neither anger nor warmth, only truth. "That's what hurt." She blinked, startled by the gentleness in his tone. There was no revenge, no bitterness, just distance measured by dignity. The kind of silence that ends things with grace instead of fire. He turned back to his work, leaving her to face the ghost she'd created. Herself. They sat later on the edge of the half-built structure, the town sprawling below. Words trickled out slowly. Her apology, his silence, the wind between them. She spoke of dreams, of mistakes, of how laughter can sometimes wound deeper than cruelty. He listened, not to forgive, but to understand the shape of what they'd both become. "You don't have to hate me," she said softly. He exhaled, steady and final. "I don't." That was the truth, and its weight was unbearable in its simplicity. When she looked at him then, she saw peace where pain had lived. It was the kind of peace you can't share once you've broken it. More, when she left that evening, the sky was bruised with twilight, clouds glowing faintly like dying embers. Ethan watched her car pull away without moving, the hum of the engine fading into the wind. He didn't feel triumph or sorrow, just relief. The kind that settles deep, clean, and final. Nora appeared beside him, handing him a thermos. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "For the first time, I think I am." She smiled, understanding more than she said. Behind them, the skeletal frame of the building rose steady and unfinished, just like him, still standing, still becoming. Isabella drove back through the night, headlights slicing through rain. The road blurred as tears mixed with exhaustion. For the first time, she didn't try to justify herself. She simply let the guilt sit, unadorned and honest. She replayed his face, not the man she'd mocked, but the one who had loved her without needing her world to validate him. That realization burned and soothed, all at once. At a rest stop, she pulled over, sat in silence, and breathed. No music, no distractions, just the truth. Some losses are permanent, Not because love dies, but because respect did first. Months passed like measured breaths. Ethan's life settled into something steady, not joy, not sorrow, just balance. The site was nearing completion, his team respected him, and the mirror no longer reflected a man defined by someone else's gaze. Every beam he set, every wall he raised, felt like reclaiming ground once lost. He no longer thought of the ring or the party or the laughter that had gutted him. What lingered now was gratitude, not for her, but for the moment he finally walked away. Healing didn't arrive with fanfare. It came with quiet mornings, black coffee, and the sound of work boots on dry soil. The world hadn't changed, only his place in it had. In the city, Isabella's reflection had grown unfamiliar. Her title still carried weight, but it no longer filled the silence between her thoughts. Invitations arrived for panels, galas, photo shoots, and she declined most. She'd traded ambition for stillness, the kind that forces you to see what's left when the applause fades. Rumors had died, but her conscience had. She tried to pour herself into charity work, late-night reports, even long walks with no destination. Yet, no matter how far she went, she kept circling back to that night, her laughter echoing through a room where love had quietly died. Success hadn't failed her. She had failed the part of herself that once knew humility. Nora noticed the change first, the ease in Ethan's shoulders, the rare humor in his tone. They shared lunch breaks on the scaffolding, stories about nothing important. She didn't press him about Isabella anymore. That chapter was sealed, even if the pages still whispered. One afternoon, as the crew packed up, she handed him an old photograph. The team from their first project, faces younger, cleaner, unaware of how much life could bend them. "You're not the same man," she said. He smiled faintly. "Good," he replied. The old one would have stayed. The photo fluttered in the breeze before he slipped it into his jacket pocket. Not as a memory, but as proof that leaving can sometimes be the only way to arrive. Isabella's downfall wasn't public. It was internal. The company still applauded her results, but she stopped believing in the glitter. Her apartment felt too large, too polished, too silent. She began spending evenings at a small community center downtown, helping run workshops for young professionals. People just starting out. People who still spoke with hope. One night, a young woman thanked her for being so grounded. Isabella smiled, unsure whether to laugh or cry. For the first time in months, she didn't feel superior. She felt human. Redemption, she realized, wasn't about forgiveness. It was about remembering what it means to care before it's too late. That weekend, Ethan visited the finished project site one last time. The building stood tall, every floor echoing the rhythm of hands and effort that shaped it. He walked its corridors slowly, tracing walls that smelled of fresh paint and purpose. Nora joined him, saying little, just watching the way he looked at what he'd built. "You ever think about her?" she asked quietly. He nodded once. "Sometimes, but not the way I used to." Outside, the wind carried sawdust and sunlight in equal measure. Some endings don't need words, just space wide enough to breathe. Winter came quietly, wrapping the city in its breathless stillness. Isabella spent most evenings alone, the hum of the radiator and the rustle of papers her only company. It had been nearly 6 months since she'd seen him, and the distance between who she was and who she pretended to be had finally caught up. One night, she opened her laptop, not for work, but to write. The cursor blinked at her like an old truth waiting to be spoken. She didn't plan the words. They came in fragments, in confessions, in tiny echoes of remorse. She didn't write to win him back. She wrote to forgive herself, to make sense of the hollow she'd built around her pride. And for the first time, it felt like exhaling after holding her breath too long. Ethan had stopped thinking about the past until one evening, Nora brought him an envelope. "From someone who needed to say what they couldn't," she said, leaving it beside his mug. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he sat by the fire in his small rented cabin, listening to the soft hiss of wood burning. When he finally unfolded the paper, the handwriting hit him harder than the words. Every sentence carried weight, not of guilt, but understanding. She spoke of ego, of blindness, of realizing that love is fragile when fed through vanity. By the end, he felt no anger, no victory, only stillness. Some letters aren't meant for answers. They exist to close a wound you stopped noticing. Isabella never sent the letter directly. She'd left it with a mutual friend, unsure if it would ever reach him. Yet after writing it, something inside her shifted. She began to wake earlier, walk slower, listen longer. Her days felt lighter, though nothing externally had changed. She started journaling daily. Not about work, but about small things. The sound of morning rain, the smell of fresh bread from the cafe below. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. The act of noticing life again. And as weeks passed, she realized that redemption was never his to give. It had always been hers to claim. Ethan folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, setting it on his nightstand. He didn't reread it. He didn't need to. The words had already done their work. Later that week, as he drove past the city skyline on his way to a new project, he caught himself smiling. Not from joy, but release. The weight that had once followed him through every mile now felt lighter, almost invisible. He turned on the radio, an old song they used to play in the truck filling the air. For the first time, he didn't turn it off. The melody wasn't a memory anymore. It was just music. That night, snow began to fall outside Isabella's apartment. She stood by the window, her reflection merging with the city lights, a ghost and a woman both reborn. She whispered a quiet thank you. Not to him, but to the lesson. Love had broken her open, and through the fracture she'd finally seen herself. She smiled, not out of happiness, but acceptance. Some stories don't end in reunion. They end in recognition of who you were, who you hurt, and who you can still become. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, erasing footprints from the night before. Spring arrived like forgiveness, soft, reluctant, but real. Ethan stood at the edge of a new project site, wind carrying the scent of earth and concrete dust. The sun broke over the horizon, washing the world in pale gold. He felt the kind of calm that doesn't announce itself. The quiet understanding that some endings give birth to steadier beginnings. Around him, workers set out their tools, laughter echoing faintly through the open air. He smiled without effort this time. The silence that had once haunted him now felt like home, a place he'd built himself. He looked toward the sky and breathed deep. Whatever she was doing, wherever she was, he hoped she'd found the same stillness. Then, he turned back to the work waiting before him. In another part of the city, Isabella walked through a park blooming with early spring. Children's laughter mixed with the rustle of new leaves. She carried no phone, no planner, just a paperback novel and the ease of unhurried steps. Passing by a couple holding hands, she smiled faintly, not in envy, but peace. Love, she'd learned, was never lost. It simply changed shape, becoming lessons, becoming gratitude. The woman who once measured worth by approval now found value in quiet anonymity. Somewhere between regret and growth, she had reclaimed herself. The world didn't owe her forgiveness. It had already given her another chance to begin. Nora visited Ethan at the site later that week, watching him work with quiet pride. "You ever think you'll settle down again?" she asked. He laughed softly, adjusting his gloves. "Maybe, but not the same way." She nodded, understanding what he didn't have to say. Some hearts don't rebuild the same. They grow differently, stronger, but less willing to fit into what once confined them. They stood together watching cranes lift steel into the air, the hum of engines harmonizing with birdsong. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a blank page. It felt like an open road. That evening, Isabella found herself near the river where she and Ethan had once spent a summer night years ago, watching city lights ripple over the water. She sat on the same bench, hands folded, breathing in the familiar air. The pain was gone, replaced by quiet gratitude. She whispered a thank you to the wind, not for what was, but for what had been enough to change her. Life, she realized, isn't about keeping what you love. It's about learning how to let it make you better before it leaves. The river moved steadily onward, unconcerned, unstoppable. Just like healing. Ethan stood on the rooftop of the completed building at dawn, the skyline unfolding in every direction. The city hummed awake beneath him, alive and unbothered by the ghosts of its stories. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the wind sweep across his face. The same wind that once carried laughter that broke him, and now peace that rebuilt him. He didn't need closure. He'd already written it in silence. Somewhere in the distance, a new day began without fanfare, and he let it. Walking toward the edge, he looked out, smiled once, and whispered, "Thank you." Then he turned away, leaving the past behind, light spilling across his path.